All right. Sorry for the delay. I won't reiterate our introduction. I'll just mention, this is really to help our subgrantees here with the Nevada Department of Agriculture for success on all levels. All right, moving on to our next slide here.
There it is.
All right. Okay. So the slides will be available on the Grant Opportunities website. So we'll send this link directly to folks too on our contact list, so you'll have it, but just want you to know that we'll be doing that. Questions, although I have here the questions will be taken at the end of the presentation. If you have a question, please raise your hand, indicate here, flag, throw things, whatever you got to do. And we'll get those addressed because we know we're actually covering a number of different topics. I do anticipate this being done within the hour. Again, I want to be really mindful of your time. If you're not speaking, please make sure to mute your microphone. And if you're having any issues with bandwidth, if the video is freezing up or something, turn off your camera. That usually helps. Okay. Just a little, general user. There's the microphone icon in that left-hand corner. You will hit that button in order to unmute yourself. Once queued, you can raise your hand and it should ping on the side here. I've got the participants listed, so we should be good on that piece. Okay. If you're on the phone, I don't think anybody was, but you hit *9 to raise your hand and *6 to unmute. Okay. All right, our objectives here are to really understand these grant awards. So, we get these federal grants. We have to hold to the federal requirements as well as the state grant requirements. And that can be inundating you folks are out there doing the groundwork. And we realize these grants can be a lot of work. So we're trying to give you some kind of best practices to help along the way. So we're starting out with that application piece. So you guys know, you look at that request for application to really get the heart of what the grant's about. So how to analyze if it's a good fit for the project that you're putting in for, what the priorities of the grant are, what some of the ineligible expenses are. There's always that print, and usually in a number of different tables on what you can do and what you can't do. I know the weeds grants are a little bit different in that structure. I think they're frankly more simple. But we'll be speaking from some of the more technical ends. But the heart of the issue is make sure you really read that request for application in detail. It's going to help you put in a good proposal. It's going to help you make sure that you're targeting the right grants. And frankly, if you're not sure if you're hitting the right grant, reach out to us because we're fairly familiar with what's out there. And we can guide you a little bit on that too, again, with making sure that we're not overstepping and giving unfair partiality to one person over another that might be applying. So understanding what the submission requirements are, understanding what the expectations throughout the grant are, so what the reporting looks like, the request for reimbursement piece, and all those types of things. There are some general requirements that you have to get, and that's getting a SAM ID, getting the UEI ID. That's a newer requirement, and that's required for anybody that's selected. We do recommend folks that are in kind of pursuing the grant world in general, just get those, because the UEI in particular can take a while to get. And so it's just better to be ahead of it. Also being mindful of conflict of interest and how you're going to track your expenses and how to expect those reimbursements. Okay. So key components that are in that RFA or RFP, that's typically what you're going to hear them called: request for applications, program purpose, goals, and measurement, the type of award, the due date, the opportunity name, all the reporting requirements laid out, because we want you to know what to expect. And then the application instructions. Now, I know you guys are past this point, but these are still some good reminders, even with repeat applications, that we try to hit on, because they do help you get through the process a little bit cleaner. And if you're talking about these to some of your colleagues or whatever, then you kind of have this under your belt. So I won't go into much more depth on this. It's, back to that RFA. Does it fit current priorities? Does it meet the needs, mission, vision, and goals? Also, the pieces, being aware of your relationships. Sometimes we have folks put in for research projects for ag producers. but they're not engaging the ag producer. So it might sound like a great idea, but is it applicable? Is it helpful? Has it been done? Those kind of things is really, really important. And if you're not sure who to contact, or if you think there might be other groups, again, that's somewhere where we might be able to help connect you folks with the right people, because we want to see these projects too. So previous relationships or connection with the funder, we do look at previous performance, meaning, have you provided the reports to us? Did you disappear for 8 months and we couldn't get a hold of you? Kind of things when we review these. And one of the things we really look at is the budget. Does it seem manageable? Does it seem reasonable? You can tell a lot from a budget and how it aligns with the proposal. Okay. So part of our process, we will get an announcement from the feds, typically on these specific awards, that there's a certain amount allocated to the state. We have to draft that request for application to make sure that we're hitting all the federal requirements and taking into account our state priorities. That's why they're funneling this money through the states, because there is priorities there. And whether it's the target noxious weed species, early detection, rapid response, or a number of different priorities, educational research, and promotion in the specialty crop grant. So reviewing the terms and conditions, developing a plan, and leveraging those relationships and partnerships are all part of that process. One of the things we really see fairly often in grant proposals, they could be 10 pages long and I still have no idea what you're trying to do. So really trying to be concise and think about, you have to assume we don't know everything of the background of the issue. It's going to a number of different levels. So why is your project needed? Where's the need? Do you have any data to substantiate it? What are you trying to meet through this project? Who's going to be impacted? How will you meet those objectives? And how are you going to measure them? Those are always key pieces in a grant, and just things to reiterate. We don't care about length. We just care about, do we understand what you're trying to do and that there's a need? And sometimes that can be done in a paragraph. I'll tell you what, I've seen some where I'm like, okay, this is a paragraph. Obviously they didn't put much effort into it. And then I read it, I'm like, it's pretty detailed. I actually don't have a single follow-up question. I get what they're trying to do. So just something to kind of keep in the back of your mind. Okay. We often see for budget builds, somebody will build, sometimes they might build their budget before they build their proposal. And a lot of times it's really obvious. They had an idea of what threshold they wanted to meet, and they filled in wherever they could, versus building your proposal and then thinking about, okay, what do I need financially to execute these objectives? That is very evident in a review process. So I always really, really strongly recommend that you do that process and you really read through your proposal, read through how you're talking about the people that are going to be doing it, because we will look for alignment. And a lot of times, sometimes we'll see something that clearly has other costs, and yet it's all personnel kind of a thing. So just be mindful of those types of things. Understand indirect versus administrative costs. And there's been a lot of changes on our end. At one point, we didn't allow for indirect to be pulled. There's been changes on the federal level that doesn't allow this restriction. So if you're pulling indirect, you do have to list. We do need to see that it aligns in your request for reimbursements. And you have to provide where you got that indirect rate. Anything else on that? Good. Yeah. Okay. And know the terms and conditions of the grant and make sure your costs are allowable. That's something really, really, really critical. If there's a lot of costs that are ineligible, it definitely shows that somebody hasn't gone through what the criteria is. And I say that with, sometimes I get it's hard to tell. And we've been in those situations too, where we're emailing the feds as well, but just really blatant things, be mindful of. Okay. Okay. I'm not gonna go
information ready to request your unique entity ID.
Sorry about that. But it does tee up the next piece of the conversation. Back to that sam.gov, the vendor number and all those pieces. Alexa did fold in a tutorial here. If you're having any issues with that in the future, everybody here has one already. So this is a good notice point for somebody that's looking at doing this in the future, and it'll be here on that presentation for you. So the next point, when you get your notice of subaward, read it. There's a lot of really critical information there. There will be some changes on the ones that are coming out in terms of frequency for request for reimbursements, things along those lines. It's really important to know the expectations. So we're going to go more into that because we've run into some challenges on our management level and working with the feds to get these draws that you'll see. So make sure you're reading those NOSAs because it's always good to have in the back of your mind. There's a number of different pages in those notice of subgrant awards that you'll have to sign and attest to, and all of those are state and federal requirements that we have to comply with. So just read in its entirety. I know it's not a great book, rest assured, but it does help with your success and ours as well. Okay, so post-award, this is bigger reason why you guys are all here. So some of the things I'm going to speak to, some of the things that I have personally done that have really helped me be successful, because we've done pass-through grants, we've executed a number of different grants, and sometimes it's hard to keep track of everything. I like to make checklists and timelines in my calendar for the things I really need to monitor. And every time I'm doing an activity on the grant, I put it in an Excel sheet or whatever works for you. If it's the notes in your phone, whatever, because at the end of the year, when you have to do these reports, it's so hard to remember all the things you've done, the people you've engaged, the number of people that were at trainings, or even to remember to count the number of people at trainings. And I'd say the biggest ones we run into is the measurables. That is such a huge, huge piece for our grantees and for our federal compliance. So making sure that you have a way to remember that you need to capture the measurables that you committed to and how you're actually going to monitor those. So we may have folks say, we're going to do surveys at the conference, and then we're going to reach back out to those folks and see what they applied, and they forget to do that stuff. And then the event's passed and ouch, what do we do now? Kind of a thing. So, again, calendar reminders work great for me. I know this is when I need to prepare my survey. This is when I'm going to execute it and so forth. Like, keep those things in mind and they'll really, really help you. And the same thing, it's great when you have a spreadsheet and it has all the different events that you've attended, the people you've talked to, or whatever it may be that aligns with your project, or the treatment acres. And it's all right there. So you can just fold it into your report. It makes life a lot easier. I've learned the hard way, believe you me. And then one big thing that we are changing, in the past, we have had requests for reimbursements due quarterly. And to be honest, we haven't even been getting that. At the end of this last fiscal year, we received a number of projects that hadn't submitted any draws throughout that whole year. And we have about a week to go through fine tooth comb and find everything. And it is complete chaos on our subgrantees timeline and for you. For the program staff and for our fiscal staff as they're trying to close our budgets. They don't get extensions on those. So with that, we're moving that up to monthly. Request for reimbursements are going to be due monthly. If you don't have draws, that's okay. Just let us know. Because despite the quarterly requirements and some of that communication, we're just seeing too often folks sit on things. And what we also run into with that is then they finally calculate what all their totals are, and they're way over in their budget categories. And that puts us in a non-compliance issue, and that some of them will reach a threshold where we have to engage the federal sponsors. And then some of them really require that we do a cover sheet modification that shows this is what you have remaining in these different areas, and really shows like what on both our tracking end internally and on your tracking end where we lie, and if that over expenditure was appropriate. Because we can, per the terms and conditions, we can say no, we don't have to pay those overages. So it's really important that we see when they're likely going to happen. We do a modification and we follow all those rules, so we're not in a predicament, or frankly you overspend in an area that we can't get permission for anyway. It's a way to help us get ahead of that, and it's a way for all of us to help manage the workload too. That's our goal here. And so with that, it's really important that you're tracking those monthly expenses, you have all the appropriate documentation, which we'll go into. So this kind of segues into making sure you're notifying the Department of Ag of any major changes in your project. So some key, these are outlined in your subgrant document. There's a number of different specific criteria, but kind of the key take homes are if you have a change in key personnel, if you have a project delay, a change to the budget cost or contractual, and a big one is you think you're going to have to change your goals, objectives, and outcomes. We can work with you through these. We just keeping up that chain of communication is really critical. It's all too often that there's a change in personnel and we hear about it 6 months later and we don't know what's happening or if it's going to continue to execute. So kind of reasons behind. Okay, so kind of just check-ins. We all have to do these check-ins on our projects. And frankly, we know these grants are not your primary job, right? This is something that you're doing to help the industry, that you're doing to help deal with some of our natural resource issues. And we get that. So with that, it's that much more important to kind of have a mechanism for you to track, check in, like, how are we doing on this project? We in and over our heads. Are we struggling in this area? Do we need to make some major changes? What are our needs? Whether that's technical assistance, whether it's training, and then asking, am I documenting my activities and outcomes? Am I preparing for and completing measurables? And do I have the information I need for reporting? I'll talk about reporting here in a second as well. Okay, request for reimbursements. This is always the hot topic. What is required? You guys will, and I know full accountability here. The processes for the request for reimbursement templates have been less than ideal, but I think we've really buttoned that up in that we now have that spreadsheet coming out to you. It helps you track each draw that you're doing and see where you left off. So you will get this request for reimbursement template in Excel. With that, you'll want to provide an expense worksheet and documentation. And what do I mean by expense worksheet? We see a number of discrepancies, and it's just hard, frankly, because we know, again, you guys are program experts, you're out doing the field work, but it really helps when we have a spreadsheet that lists, okay, here's my personnel, and here are the things I'm asking for reimbursement for. So it could be paying Jake Dick to be going out and doing monitoring. So you have employee name, number of hours, what he worked on, how much you're asking for. And then you'll have the backup documentation to substantiate that. And if it's supplies, like here's our supplies, here's a list of the vendors and how much for each. So we can cross-reference those receipts to what you're reporting. Because oftentimes what we see is your receipts don't add up to that total, or you're reading them differently in a category than what we would, and making sense of what you gave us can be very difficult. And on both ends, difficult for your folks too, because it may not be the program lead that's putting it together. So we do have an expense cover sheet example, and that really, really helps with the review and really mitigates some of the back and forth on just the calculation errors. And then in terms of documentation, this I know is an area where people wanted to pull their hair out because we've buttoned up our processes too. It has to be, if it's something contractual, like fully executed contract, proof of pay, like the invoice to that contractor and proof that they got paid. I know that seems like a lot, but what we run into is, and this is not the majority, but unfortunately it creates rules for everybody, right? What we run into is somebody reporting, here's my invoice from a contractor. And then when we ask for proof of payment, they never paid them, kind of a thing. And we've run into that a number of times. That's why it's a federal and state requirement. So some simple ways that you can give us backup documentation on that is the contractor invoice. They can list whether it was paid or a pending total, and we'll provide some examples here in a bit. And then you always get a printed copy of the cash check through your account. You can just save that page and throw it on the back. And it's thankfully the banking system has been digitized, and that really helps us with that proof of documentation. That proof of cash check, great. if your bank doesn't have that service, the other thing you can do, which I know is not everybody's favorite, you can have a printout of the account with all the confidential information blacked out, and then circle that transaction went through to that vendor. That we accept as well. It shows we've done our due diligence, making sure they got paid. So again, we'll show some examples, but that's kind of what we're looking for. For personnel, that one can be trickier. We really need to see who did what, when, how many hours, and make sure. So then we can cross-reference that it aligns with your scope of work. And then we have to see that they got paid. So those are all kind of key things. We know different folks have different processes. If it's a timesheet, like we need to see that it was signed off and that they were paid. So, and a lot of times we'll get like, here's our hours, that's what this person worked, but we have no idea what they did. And we have to make sure that they're doing things aligned with the scope of work as well. So there's a number of different things that can work. And if you're not sure the best process for you, we will work with you in advance. We want to set you up for success on that. Okay. RFR submission frequency, as I mentioned, it'll be monthly submissions of the RFRs as a minimum. If you don't have any expenses for that quarter, just send your program contact and let them know, no expenses. We'll file that, good to go. So we are putting forward kind of this, and I don't like the way this sounds, but this 3-strike process. If we're not getting these notices, we're not getting RFRs, like at the 3rd strike, it'll be written in that we can potentially revoke funds. It's in the terms and conditions in the sub awards of the frequency, and we're just not seeing that. We don't by any means want to do that, but we've got to have the request for reimbursements coming in regularly. If you don't have any for 3 quarters of the year, that's fine. Just let us know. Let us know when they'll be coming in. And then as they're coming in, if you have expenses, September 1 through September 15th, make sure, even if they're small, you got to get them to us in that month, right? But we understand some of you have, especially for like conferences, there's going to be a certain time where you're getting nailed with all of the transactions. We totally get that. Just communicate with us. You can submit requests for reimbursements more than monthly if you like. We realize, that works better for a lot of business practices. Especially if you have a large expense. Back to meetings is a great example. Like you're paying a lot of things in a fairly short period of time. So if you needed a couple in that month time span, send them to us. We'll get them routed and we'll get them paid. The same for some of the folks that might be dealing with the noxious weeds. You may have done a massive purchase on pesticides and need to get that back right away. Like you can send that at any frequency that works for you. Anything on that? Agree. All right. Okay. Checking with Janet, making sure she's not silently sobbing over there. Okay. Request for reimbursements in the fiscal year end. So we talked on this. You guys saw our panicked emails in May. I think April, May of, hey, if you are able to stop spending on those grants 2 weeks before the end of our state fiscal year. So trying to stop, a couple of weeks before June 30th, so you can get us those RFRs. It really streamlines the process. On the state level, our fiscal team has to close that fiscal budget, has to get everything paid, has to get federal draws, and deal with all of our other programs as well. And when we get hung up in a year's worth of transactions, it sure creates a nightmare. And it can come to stale claims if we just can't get the backup that we need, or whatever it may be in that couple time period. If people wait till the last minute, stale claims take months to get paid, and we just don't want to be in that pickle. So if your project allows for you to do that, wonderful. It does help us to manage the workload better. But nonetheless, all expenses must be turned in prior to that fiscal year deadline. So if you happen to find a receipt and you're like, oh shoot, I must have missed this one, and it was a few months before the close of the fiscal year and you're putting it in, we can still try to get those paid. You need to communicate with us when those things happen. We can't see it be a habit. But if once we pass that state fiscal year, we have to consider whether we can pay it, and it can be no. And so it's really, really important that we get those in time, because we can't pay something that happened in June of 2023 in December. We can't just cut a check. It is not that simple. And frankly, some of them, we may have already closed the federal award and we can't pay it. Like, it's just done. So just for the sake of everybody, we just want to make sure we're diligent on that. I know I'm a broken record, just trying to make sure we're all able to get people paid and taken care of. We will send out notices of deadlines in advance to remind you. We'll send your the RFR templates. One of the things we've been trying to be more diligent about too is what your remaining award is. That's a really good way for us to flag if something got lost. If you guys sent us something, we missed it, or it just got caught up in our Barracuda filter system. So that's a way for you to be like, no, you should have, like, I sent something for $5,000 3 weeks ago, and shoot. But it flags that we need to go track that down and get you guys taken care of. Okay, I think I spoke on all of these other things about stale claims. Okay, how to fill out the request for reimbursement. So you'll see here in this this column A, approved budget, that's going to be what's in your subgrant award to the T for each of those categories. Now, it's important to remember, if you are going to be going over or under in a category and you want to move funds around, you do need to notify us what that looks like and give us a justification, so we can see if we need to engage the federal sponsor, because there is a threshold there where they have to sign off on it. And B, it gives us time to give you a modification so that we have like a mutual understanding of what your new category authority is. And that's to make sure you guys can get paid. Because again, if you're just kind of running with this, you're not monitoring these, and say for this one, you have $5,000 in personnel and you ended up spending 10. I mean, we could be in a pickle where we cannot reimburse that extra 5. The best way to avoid that is to communicate and monitor your budget in advance. And again, those monthly RFRs really help do that. Okay. So make sure it'll show total prior requests. So anything that you put in for in the past, your current request, column C. So what you're asking for in that specific request, and then your year-to-date total along with your budget balance. So it kind of gives you, for each one that you send, where you're at. I will note there is a discrepancy on this one, and then it says draw number 1. It can't be draw number 1 because it has a total prior request. So pretend this says draw number 2. And then you'll make sure that you have a physical or a digital signature. And then you make sure we have the date somewhere along the lines. So sometimes we see folks that have had many, many grants, and they continue to pull old RFRs and they send them to us. And the pickle that we run into is sometimes they'll have old grant numbers on there, old subgrant numbers, or they'll have a combination of the two. And some of them have multiple awards. So it's really hard for us to navigate which one lies where and what they're trying to do. So if you can do your best to work off of the ones that we send you, that really, really helps. And I'll be the first to admit, sometimes we make errors too. Like, understand it happens, but don't doctor the top of that form. And if it's our error, we'll fix it.
And don't doctor anything but column C in the numbers there, because that calculates things for you. And if you start playing with the other columns, it messes things up.
Yes. And like I mentioned, you'll see this in an Excel. So you'll have different sheets. And then it'll carry over the numbers to sheet 2, sheet 3, sheet 4. So all your RFRs are kind of a running account, and you know where you are. So back to that expense worksheet. This is a good example of kind of what we're looking for. And I know it seems like extra work, but believe you me, if you do this from the get-go when you're submitting these, it is so much easier. I don't know how many times I've been like, I'll do it in my head, or I'll write it down on this piece of paper. And if that works for you, that's fine. However, I make errors every time, and then I'm going back and trying to figure out what I did. If you just throw it into a spreadsheet, you've got everything right before you. And a lot of times it's just an update of a number or an addition of another transaction. It does make it a lot easier. And we have a template on our webpage. Yep.
I have to throw out here, I love your example.
Oh, good. Oh, does it look familiar?
The Simpsons.
Oh my goodness. I thought maybe she pulled yours. Yeah, now that I'm reading it. I love, yeah, thank you. Appreciate that. Indeed, Homer Simpson. All right. Very nice. Yeah, so you'll list for personnel, the title, the description. The only thing missing here would be what the hours are. So, but it could be in the actual formula for that for column H. It may say, equals 10 times 23.5, which gets us to the 235. So just making sure we kind of see what was happening here. Mr. Krusty Clown Entertainer, 125. And then again, we're going to look for the backup documentation. The travel's a good one too, because it actually breaks down the trips and kind of helps streamline that process for you too. So supplies, like a lot of times we get dozens of receipts and invoices, and just if you list out what the vendor was, what the amount was, and then we can reach those totals, we usually end up in the same place. So, okay. Okay, RFR checklist. Okay. So on that sheet, one thing that's really helpful too, that frankly, I will admit I've been guilty of missing, is there is a calendar year in a month. But now that we're going to be doing these monthly, it is important to make sure that you have the appropriate month listed there. It's right above where all the transactions are listed in your categories. So make sure you have the month for what you're submitting the RFR for, and then the year is accurate. It just, again, helps kind of paint the picture of what's happened and that transaction history. Okay. We'll talk, I think a lot of this is kind of reiterating what we talked about, but just making sure it's here. This is a good one. If you have a receipt and there's no way of making sense what that was for, please provide written notes. A lot of smaller operations will just have kind of those old school registers, and they just print like the quantity and the total, and it doesn't list what it is. Make sure that you're putting that information in so we can piece that together. If we realize in practicality, you're going to the store and you may be getting things for home and for work at the same time. So if there are things on that receipt that were for personal or aren't related, maybe for another grant, just circle the things that you're asking for the reimbursement for. Okay. And we cannot reimburse tax. So make sure that that is struck, because you should be presenting the tax exemption as that. Yep. So make sure that that's not in the claim as well. Okay. And yeah, make sure, we've gotten some obscure ones where there's like deodorant and toothpaste and things listed. I'm like, I can't quite pay that. So just, but I see what you were trying to get reimbursed for. Just keep an eye out on that stuff on your receipts. I think nothing too embarrassing, so that's good. Okay, and back to that proof of payment. This is the one I think where folks have struggled, and we've really had to grow in this as well. Acceptable proof of payments may include copies of checks, cash checks, wire transfers paid to vendor. We don't see that one too often. And again, remember that you can, okay. Here. Remember where I was going with that. Copies of credit card statements and corresponding payment. So, oh, sorry. Remember, you can strike out your account information. We don't need that. We just need to see clearly this is a bank report from US Bank, and it shows this vendor was paid. Highlight that part for us, and we're good to go. Okay. Anything on that? Okay. Travel. So this is one I feel we're constantly learning on. Making sure what the trip was for, what the mode of transportation was, what they were going to. Like, we do need these details. It can't be just something general for travel. We've seen folks put in a number of different transactions for travel, but it needs to align with the actual approved scope of work. Mind you, we realize there's going to be some obscure things, and if that's the case, just contact us so we can make a note like, hey, that makes sense. We have this email in our file. You talk to us, we're good to go. For vehicle expenses, if somebody's driving to something, mileage reimbursement is based on the federal rate. Or it can be the actual gas receipt, but it can't be both. Hotel bills need to be the GSA rates. However, if your organization has a policy and procedure for when this could be beyond that, we will consider it. Really, the only example I can think of that would be appropriate is if the organization has a policy that the rate can be reasonably higher if that's where a conference is held. You're staying at the location where a conference is held. We're paying a little bit more because frankly, we're catching it on the back end of convenience of not having to pay for transportation and all those pieces. So that's really the only time we're going to really consider, but we need to see that that there's a policy within your organization that allows for that. So, no Ritz-Carlton typically is going to fall within that GSA rate. So just be mindful of that. And it's in the proposal build. So likely we're going to flag it there, but just in the implementation piece, really important. For airfare, like we can pay for coach or economy ticket. We can't be paying for upgrades, priority boarding, things along those lines.
It's really important when you send that airfare stuff that it shows that it's an economy ticket. Because sometimes when you book through things like Expedia or somewhere else, it doesn't show what type of ticket you booked, just that you booked it. So
yeah. And if you want to upgrade, you can do that, but we can't like strike that piece and show us what the other, what the normal cost would have been. Equipment, thankfully, knock on wood, we don't run into this too often. Any tangible items over $5,000 are considered equipment purchases. Anything under $5,000 are considered supplies. So if this item, which must have been approved in your scope of work, it has to have detailed receipts showing the equipment purchased, full proof of payment, all of those things. There is tracking. We will deal with these on an individual basis. We don't currently have any that have equipment at this point in time, but there is additional reporting because it can be retained by the state or the feds at the conclusion of the grant. If it's sold, then some of that money may have to go back to the state or the feds. So it's very situational, but it's really trying to address and make sure that people don't buy equipment and then they make a profit off of federal dollars later. That's not how it should be. Mind you, we also realize if somebody bought a high tunnel hoop house and they sold their PVC pipe 10 years later, probably not in our interest to really try to recoup that, right? Okay. I think we covered for supplies, detailed receipts showing what it was. Making sure they align with the work plan. And I do want to stress, we realize when you're building a proposal, there's going to be changes by the time you're actually executing. Like, totally understand that. If there's if the supplies, it's very clear, like, no, this definitely aligned with what they were trying to do in their proposal. We're not overly worried about that as long as you're staying within your categories. If you're ever in doubt, please reach out to us. Okay, for contractual, this was something honestly I hadn't been asking for, but I understand it makes sense. We ran into this with an event. There was a contractor at the event and we had an agreement, but it wasn't signed. So making sure we have like the fully executed signed agreement, then the receipt and invoice that it was paid, and then the proof of payment. And it hurts my heart to say, but I have actually had contractors call us, and frankly, employees asking when they're going to get paid, where, they got, the subgrantee got paid and then never carried that on. So we've seen this many years ago. We've seen the consequences. We were able to make sure they got paid, but that's another reason why we're really making sure we see that proof of payment. many, many, many years ago, just reassuring Janet here. Okay. We already talked about GSA rate. If there's publication costs, kind of intuitive here, that, you know, anything, the costs associated with publishing that research that was approved. But again, it must be in that approved scope of work on the same backup documentation we provided. Okay, into the reporting. I promise we're in the home stretch. Make sure you stick to the templates that are provided and reference your scope of work. This is the time you can really shout out all your critical work. And frankly, I always feel like when we're at a reporting stage, you forget how much you've done. And it's such a cool time to really reflect on all the work that you've done. There are a lot of times there's different templates for different awards. So make sure you're working off of the template that we send you. This is the time where having that activity sheet that you've been tracking with, whether it's acres treated, what you treated, or number of attendees at your education event, all those things really come into effect here. So be organized and track your activities throughout the year. Typically we have our reports due in the fall. We have to have them to the feds in December, and going through all of them and making sure that all of the criteria is met, because we get a lot of back and forth questions from the feds, and it's a critical point for our monitoring as well. So plan for that time, and don't scramble too much. If you're tracking throughout, it'll be much better. So being mindful of the dates, stay on top of your fiscal and activity tracking, and take a look at those templates ahead of time. You know, we do have those on our website. We have them on the USDA website. You can kind of see what to expect. And they're the key areas that we'll be asked to report on are in the request for applications. So you can see them ahead of time and kind of be prepared. But frankly, you can kind of anticipate anything in your scope of work. They're asking for measurables, be prepared to report on them. And then don't hesitate to ever ask any questions. Back to modifications. If you're anticipating any modifications, whether it's to the scope of work or the budget, communicate with us and we'll give you those next steps. Reach out and communicate. We're here to help. You know, I just want to really hit that home. Like, we love ag. We love our state. We so appreciate the critical work that you guys are doing in preserving and protecting that. So we're here, don't hesitate. And I'm so close to stopping and talking. And I just want to hit home, you know, at the end of the day, we want you to succeed. And we all have these same federal and state requirements to meet and get through that process. So thank you for all you do. And that's the last slide in my presentation. I'm gonna open it up to questions. And as I'm doing that, I'm gonna pull up a couple of the documents just for like RFR sake, to kind of give you an idea of some of the things we were talking about.
All right, so since you're expecting to hear me talk, Ashley, I want to give a big shout out to Kimberly Higgins, our grant manager for Cabner, for being on this call. As I noticed, there's also, besides myself, there's Felipe and Jill from campus and Jill from DFI that are also Cabner, you know, UNR University, that have evidently received grants for things. So thank you, Kimberly. So I don't have to repeat all this information to you. Thanks for being here.
Thanks, Carol. Here's an example of, it's not, I mean, obviously it doesn't have somebody's transaction information, but an example of a proof of payment. So when these are actually fully, it lists an invoice number, it's clearly associated with a company, who the subgrantee recipient is, the amount due versus amount enclosed, and then it will have like that the transaction actually happened. So as we go down here, it shows what the registration cost was, the payment was made, it has the MasterCard, it'll usually have the last 4 digits, and then amount due 0. So kind of an example of things to look for. I'd say more often than not in the past, we've gotten these where it says pending amount 300. And we just have no way of telling if somebody got paid. And we get, a lot of times that's just what you guys get, you paid it, but we just have to see that other piece. Okay, let me see if this next one will pop up. So here's a grant hour log. Can you guys see that? Oh, I don't know if it's actually moving over the shared screen. It should.
I can
Jake?
see it.
Okay, great.
Yeah, yes.
Okay, so this shows like dates worked. I love the names here as well, Alexa. Dates worked, the number of hours worked, their hourly rate. The only thing I would say to make sure that we have here is what they did.
Mhm.
Okay, and sometimes that can be detailed, and we've seen it like this coupled with an invoice that shows like, you know, 222 through 623, they were working on these key things. And then we still have to see that proof of payment. Okay. Go ahead.
On this sheet, should we include what they were doing?
Yes, you
So
definitely
yeah, but just
can.
add one more
Yeah.
because
Yeah,
I know
that's what I would do. It's easier to
Okay.
do it that way, certainly.
Okay.
And this is still a fairly crude, like a lot of folks have a payroll system. And for the payroll system, actually, let me go to one of those.
Probably payroll example and payroll example 2. One is, it shows.
Yeah.
So that's a check.
Let me see if I can. Yeah, so here, yeah, here's the check that was issued. Again, we don't have what they did here. It does have, obviously, we've moved away, we've pulled the name here. We have the rate and we have when they got paid, which is great. We just need to know what they did and proof that they got paid.
The one that has a good log of the work they did is the one that says redacted for training. So that's a full RFR.
Okay. So here we see this is draw 6. You guys can see those, you know, total prior requests, current requests. So we're looking at $1,210. And then when we go into the worksheet,
Page 3.
here's their the worksheet that we talked about. So it's like pulling out each individual thing that they did. And then as we go to the actual invoice, so the work involved, they had the person's name here listed, how many hours they worked, what they were doing, all those key things. It has the date, which is important, total hours.
The very bottom of this, there's one thing that wasn't redacted, so just.
Okay, I think I caught it earlier. Same thing, it's just kind of breaking it down. And then we would just need the proof of payment. Okay.
So that's their payroll system, and one of them actually has a canceled check associated with it.
Is the cancel check good to show? Okay.
Should be.
So just as you guys can see, a number of different examples here for how they documented their payroll. Okay. And then, yeah, we have that printed copy of the check. So that works, that suffices. Okay.
There's one that's no proof of payment.
I think we kind of got it. All right.
Hi, I'm Crystal Metzenheim. I work at University of Nevada, Reno, and I'm a grant accountant here. And I put together the invoices on behalf of our institution for Cabner. So our employees, we use a effort reporting system. Would that suffice for tracking the employees' hours, like their effort? Because they have to sign off on that. It's a mandated system that we use. Or do we still need to provide the detailed how many hours, what they did, where they did it type of thing?
I think you guys give us your journal that has it allocated and it breaks it down by grant, which has been acceptable for the way you guys do things.
Is it
So-
okay?
And I'd say more often than not, in some of those reporting systems, yeah, it just shows how much an employee received.
Correct.
So yeah, we do need more information on what were they doing and verification that they were paid.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, of course. And usually it's a little bit easier on your guys' end to be able to prove that. I mean, it's in Dawn, right? It can usually show that the transaction hit and match the rate. So there's a number of different ways that you guys can do that. You kind of have an advantage on that piece.
Yeah, the
So-
financial parts are here at UNR is easy. It's the getting the notes to match up.
Of course, of
Yeah.
course. I heard another.
Yes, hi Ashley, this is Felipe. So does it mean that if a student, like a graduate student, is getting a stipend, do we need to document everything that the student does every week, or we report that the student is focused on the research related to the proposal and that's it?
That's a great question and a timely question. This has actually been a big discussion point across the states on specialty crop grant. There's been some discussions on stipends. So I honestly would say like having them complete a weekly, like what they've done on a weekly basis to really hit home that it aligns with the grant work. Because frankly, we're actually worried that they're going to make this as an ineligibility in the future because they're seeing this get approved and then these students aren't working on those grants. So I would recommend that for actually trying to continue to preserve that ability in these grants. And you can put the onus on, as you know, you can put the onus on the student to track that. I think there is some flexibility in that if they're kind of doing repeat things, just making sure kind of like the dates align with when they were paid and just like kind of defaulting that is fine on our end too.
Okay, thank you.
I know I covered a lot and I'm long-winded, so please, are there any other questions, or did Jake, Alexa, or Janet have anything they want to add that I muckied up?
It's always best if you know, like, especially when you're waiting on someone to cash a check because you need to get your RN by the end of the month. If that's something that's happening, like you've sent them the check, you have the invoice and you haven't gotten it back, or you're waiting on something, it's always best just to reach out to us in advance and let us know. So don't wait until after the fact, or, you know, we're 6 months down the line and then someone finally cashed a check and you're afraid to submit it or whatever. Like, if you're having problems meeting one of these, let us know in advance so that we can work with you and try and come up with a solution. Everyone has different ways of keeping track of things and doing stuff, and we'll work with you until we can find one that gets the bases covered that we need to have, because we're responsible to the federal sponsors to show them that we are administering these funds and making sure that they're being spent appropriately, but we want to make sure that you're successful in your grants. So communication is always important. You know,
Yeah.
if something comes up and you found an expense that you missed and you're worried about, well, I'm going to submit this on an RFR and we're going to have overlap, just tell me why. Like, hey, I found an expense that was missed. Can I go ahead and submit a separate RFR that's going to overlap with one that was already paid? As long as we have documentation for it and we can understand why it happened, we're usually pretty good with it.
And I know we're at the end of the hour. I'm going to stop the recording. So I'll just conclude with appreciate you guys being here and we're here to help. So I'm going to stop the recording.